Good morning, everyone, or afternoon now, I guess. Thanks for joining the press conference with United Nations Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. Human rights expert Ms. Mireille Fanon-Mendez-France heads the panel. She is joined by experts Mr. Subelo Gumete and Mr. Ricardo Sunda. The group has been in the U.S. on a fact-finding mission since the 19th of January, and other than Washington, D.C., has visited Baltimore, Jackson, Mississippi, Chicago, and New York City. Today is the final day of the mission. The group is here this morning to share their preliminary findings. The report containing the group's findings and recommendations will be presented to the Human Rights Council in Geneva in September of this year. I will turn the floor over to Ms. Mendez-France to go through some of the expert group's key findings and recommendations, and then the group will take some questions. This gathering was intended for journalists initially, and then we decided to expand it to include civil society. We'll ask it when we get to the question and answer portion that the journalists feel provided the opportunity to ask questions first, and then open the floor to the rest of the group. Additionally, as I indicated earlier when I came in, we have a hard stop at 1 o'clock as the group is rushing off to Dallas to get on flights. So keep the questions as questions and keep them brief when we have the opportunity for that. I want to turn it over to Ms. Mendez-France.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Bonjour. Nice to see you. Great to see a lot of people concerned by our country visit. It was a very useful country visit, very intense. Unfortunately, we escaped every time to not be stopped by the weather. That's why we have visited all the country plans, all the city plans, the 5 cities on our agenda. I need my glasses. We have a long statement. I don't know if all of you get it or not. You got it? Okay. It's a long statement followed by a lot of recommendations to the United States, US. As you know, we already, I don't want to read all the statements because it's very long. I will take some points, some issue, as all of you got the right version. And at the end, there is the recommendation. And I will pick some very important points. As you know, we visit Washington, Baltimore, Jackson, Mississippi, Chicago, and New York City. And this morning, we thank the United States, the government of the United States for its invitation. But now, we will thank the hundreds of civil society representative organizations, lawyers, and individuals from the African descent community who for sharing their concern and recommendation with our delegation. It was very helpful for us. And we also, of course, thank the number of human rights defenders and activists. We have just one regret. It was not possible for us to visit the Mississippi State Penitentiary, according to the term of preference for special procedure mandate holders. But even that, we succeed to meet some former inmates and family of inmates, and it was a very important meeting with for get information about the situation, the exact situation on health, on mass incarceration, on juvenile incarceration in prison. And we have to inform you, the view expressed in this statement are of a preliminary nature. Our finding and recommendation will be present in our mission report to the United Nations Human Rights Council in September 2016. The main objective of our visit was to assess the situation of African American and people of African descent and gather information on the forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, Afrophobia, and related intolerance they are faced. In the first part of the statement, there is a positive point we constate. You know them, some of them, the Fair Sentencing Act, promoting the Justice Department, smart on crime, initiative, implementing the new guidance for federal law, etc. I don't want to list all, you can read it. And of course, during our visit, we heard about the decision taken by the current government to ban the solitary confinement for juveniles, and we appreciate that, of course. But it could be. And we also welcome the abolition of the death penalty in 3 additional states since the working group visit, because our visit now is a follow-up of the 2000 country visit, but also it's a new country visit because at this time we have visited some city not visited in the last country visit. That's why since this 2010 country visit, we welcome the 3 additional states. We apply the abolition of the death penalty as a form of inhuman punishment and disproportionately used against African Americans. We note with satisfaction in the area of health, the adoption of the patient protection and affordable health care, which has allowed 2.3 million African Americans to gain medical health insurance. There is a lot of, there is some positive aspect, you can read it, but despite the positive measure referred to above, the working group is extremely concerned about the human rights situation of African Americans. And one of the first things is concerns the colonial histories, the legacy of enslavement, racial subordination and segregation, racial terrorism, and racial inequality in the US. That's remains a serious challenge, as there has been no real commitment to reparation and to truth and reconciliation for people of African descent. And also we have noted, despite some substantial change in the end of the enforcement of Jim Crow and the fight for civil rights, ideology answering the domination of one group over another continue to negatively impact the civil, political, economical, social, and cultural rights of African Americans today. And we note also the dangerous ideology of white supremacy inhibits social cohesion among the US population. Lynching was a form of racial terrorism that has contributed to a legacy of racial inequality that the US must address. Thousands of people of African descent were killed in the violent public act of racial control and domination, and the perpetrators were never held accountable. We have some general comments on the contemporary police killing and the trauma it creates are still reminiscent of the racial terror lynching of the past. Impunity for state violence has resulted in the current human rights crisis and must be addressed as a matter of urgency. There is also racial biases and disparity in the criminal justice system, mass incarceration, and the two on the crime policy have disproportionately impacted African Americans. Mandatory minimum sentencing, disproportionate punishment of African Americans, including the death penalty in some states, are of great concern. We have the possibility during our visit to observe the excessive control and supervision targeting all life of African Americans. It was supported, and we also have meeting with a young student from a college in Minnesota, and they informed us about that. This control since September 2001 has been reinforced by the introduction of the Patriot Act. It was mentioned by some lawyers saying the Patriot Act has increased the control of African Americans. And we heard that people of African descent are treated by the state as a dangerous criminal and face a presumption of guilt rather than innocence. The state is also not acting with due diligence to protect the rights of African communities, as evidenced by the lack of gun control and stand your ground law, among others. Hate crime groups, including white supremacy terror, are still active, and we could see that during the attack at the church in Charleston in 2015. And we were in Jackson, Mississippi, and we constate the Confederation flag is still there, and by the African American, it is considered as a symbol of hate for many of them. And we know also that it's right to lay the campaign to have it removed, but it's still an issue by some local authorities. There is also a persistent gap in almost all the human development indicators, such life expectancy, income and wealth, level of education, and even food security among African Americans and the rest of the US population. And that reflects a level of structural discrimination that create de facto barrier for people of African descent to fully exercise their human rights. The disparity is also in the enforcement of policy. In we could see that in the different approaches adopted by states to address issues such as racial profiling, presence of police in school, and it was I again repeat what it was said by young students from Minnesota. They told us they are arrested and even traumatized by the daily arrest and control from the police inside their school. And some of them have been arrested inside their room with the teacher there, in their classroom. Thank you. The criminalization of homelessness, the limitation of the use of lethal force by law enforcement officials, the use of solitary confinement, and the trial of juvenile offender, among others. But we were also informed, and we met the mother or the sister or the brother of some of them, and would like just make you aware about this case. And because their family are still seeking justice, and it includes Tyrone West, Tyrone Lewis, Jonathan Sanders, Oscar Grant, Tony Robinson, Marlon Brown, Ronald Johnson, Mohamed Barr, and Alonzo Smith, and India Kager. And we could say after that, despite some efforts made by the Department of Justice, there is still a lack of an official national system to track killing committed by law enforcement officials. And it was reported by Washington Post and The Guardian. And regarding this issue, we are also concerned about the low number of cases where police officers have been held accountable. We have identified that the lack of initial investigation conducted by independent and external bodies from police departments, the wide discretion of Attorney General to determine when and how to present charges, and the state and county regulation that are not in line with international standards on the use of the force and firearms are some of the main barriers to police accountability. And racial profiling is also a big concern, as it is a rampant practice and seriously damages the trust which African Americans have in relation to law enforcement officials. 2.3 million people incarcerated and 4.8 million on parole, on probation, mass incarceration, and it has a disproportionate impact on people of African descent. In fact, 1 in 3 African American men will go to prison or jail if current trends continue. It is an enormous number of people, incarcerated people. And we note also that African American women are increasingly being targeted by the criminal justice system. The cost of mass incarceration practice must be measured in human lives, and particularly the generation of young Black who serve long prison sentence and are lost to their family and community. And we are concerned about this number of incarceration because it has a devastating effect on child and children more generally. We are also concerned by the inadequate condition of detention and in accessing quality health care, including for mental health. We met some inmates who were either misdiagnosed. Oh, sorry, I need to. Misdiagnosed. Oh, okay, you understand? Thank you, I apologize. Or sometimes over medicated. African American community highlight that the privatization of prison might tend to privilege the earning of profits by sacrificing adequate detention conditions. And we were informed about the treatment for hepatitis C for some inmates, and particularly in Pennsylvania, where there is a high number of inmates with hepatitis C. Sorry. We are also concerned about the criminalization of poverty affects African Americans. We were concerned also by the increasing number of people in prison for minor offense and those who are unable to pay debt due to an increase in fines and fees. And they are detained in debtor prison and make to work off the debt. We are also concerned by the excessive punishment of poor children for minor offenses. And we have constated the devastating impact of the war on drugs, which has led to mass incarceration, is compared to enslavement as a means to exploit and dehumanize African. And even after their release, the people that serve their time continue to be stigmatized when they are released, and their criminal record inhibits them from finding a job, getting adequate housing, or accessing social programs. And some reentry programs are not well funded, are not present countrywide. About juvenile prisons, we are concerned about the underage prosecution of children as adults in the US. Children are detained in adult jail and prison, putting them at risk of sexual assault and abuse. This practice are a violation of children's human rights and should be eliminated. Juveniles should be treated as a juvenile no matter what crimes they are alleged to have committed, and must be held in a juvenile facility. We have also constated the cumulative impact of racially motivated discrimination faced by African Americans in the enjoyment of their right to education, right to health, right to housing and employment, among other economical, social, cultural, and environmental rights. And it has serious consequences for their overall well-being. Racial discrimination continues to be systematic and rooted in an economic model that denies development to the poorest African American community. And it concerns more than 10 million of African Americans that remain mirrored in poverty, and almost half of them live in what is known as a deep poverty. About the quality of life and for health also, we learned that African Americans have limited access to food variety, including healthy food, and even we heard the number of highest rates of obesity is linked to food desert in certain locations. Racial discrimination impedes the ability of Black women to maintain overall good health, control their sexuality and reproduction, survive pregnancy and childbirth, and parent their children. Black women in the USA died from pregnancy-related complications at a rate 3 to 4 times higher than white women. About the school, we were informed that across the country there are police in the school arresting, it was what I mentioned before, and for minor offense. And also there is a specific thing about the school. It's African American children are more likely to face harsh disciplinary measures than white children. This phenomenon has been sadly described as the school to prison pipeline. What we're concerned about the legacy of enslavement and the colonization in curricula, the historical facts concerning the period of colonization and enslavement are not sufficiently covered. This period, crucial in other organizations of the current American society, is treated differently by state and fail to address the root causes of racial inequality and injustice. And that contributes to the structural invisibility of African Americans. We were also about school, we were also informed about segregation school, de facto segregation school. Segregation appeared to be nurtured by a culture of insufficient knowledge of the history of enslavement and the Jim Crow law. This is also a lack of attention to the matter of reparatory justice for enslavement and its effects. We are concerned also about the persistence of de facto residential segregation in many of the metropolitan area in the US. And we got information from New York about the city of New York, and we could see how the map points the place, the location where the African Americans are living. And if you double the map with the map of poverty, it's absolutely the same location. And if you also add on the map of healthcare, you have a clear view on where are located, where are living African American or other minority. I think it's this kind of cards are useful for understand also how the residential segregation is working. Okay. And in a lot of city visited, we heard about the difficulty African American are facing housing crowding, in which people are not able to pay their rent or mortgage, and even less to purchase a new house. We were also informed about the destruction, of public housing of some cities. And at the same time, there is no public funding for new house apparition, and therefore it is insufficient to meet the demand of new housing. And we also heard that African Americans are more likely than similar borrowing profile to be victims and to receive higher cost loans. Also, of course, heard about the process of gentrification that has an heavy impact on African Americans who are being displaced from the city center under the argument of the need for new investment and development. Specifically, we have an example on that. It is an eviction, demolition, and conversion of very farm public housing in Washington, D.C. What we could constate regarding the recovery of the U.S. economy, the impact of the 2008-2009 economic recession on African American, an impact that is still present. The unemployment rate among African American is twice the national unemployment rate, and the level of unemployment among young African American without a high school degree is very important and high, and we are very concerned about that. And what we heard in 2014, the annual income for African Americans was almost half the income of white Americans who are not Hispanic. We heard about also problem with environment, and specifically with incinerator on the area of the project in Curtis Bay, Baltimore, but also with contaminated water in Flint, Michigan. And African Americans are most affected by this issue of environment, and they are calling for environmental justice as they are disproportionately exposed to environmental hazard, impacting their health and standard of living. We also study the intersectionality of the different forms of discrimination and heard experiences of discrimination based on skin color, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status, sex, gender identity, and also religion. We constate an increasing level of violence and murders of transgender women. We were informed about that. We note also the complexity of the organization of the legal system with independence of federal, state, county, and tribal jurisdiction and lack of direct applicability of international human rights law and federal law and policy creates gaps that impact deeply on the human rights of African Americans. We are also very concerned about the fact that African Americans do not have the possibility to bring their cases or individual complaints to regional and international bodies when they have exhausted all domestic remedies at the state, federal level, as they are not party to the protocol which would allow them to bring complaints. Furthermore, international human rights treaties cannot be invoked in national court as there is no enabling legislation and they have been declared non-self-executing. It is the end for the report. preliminary report. Now we have a lot of recommendations. As the time is recommendation, okay. Maybe you can read. Please do it.
I will take you through the recommendations that we have made following our visit.
What is your name again?
My name is Sabelo Beneti. I'm a member of the working group. The first recommendation relates to the issue of the absence of human rights commission. We urge the US government to establish a national human rights commission in accordance with the Paris principles. The government should establish within this body a specific division to monitor the human rights of African Americans. In addition to the above, the working group urges the government of the United States to consider the ratification of co-international human rights treaties to which the United States is still not a party, with a view to remove any gaps in the protection and full enjoyment of rights therein. It also encourages the United States to ratify regional human rights treaties as well as review reservations related to the treaties it has signed or ratified. Federal state laws should be adopted incorporating the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and other international human rights treaties. There is a profound need to acknowledge that the transatlantic slave trade was a crime against humanity, and among the major sources and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, and that Africans and people of African descent were victims of these acts and continue to be victims of their consequences. Past injustices and crimes against African Americans needs to be addressed with reparatory justice. Monuments, memorials, markers should be erected to facilitate this important public dialogue. Education must be accompanied by acts of reconciliation, which are needed to overcome acts of desegregation. Federal and state legislation should be passed, recognizing the experience of enslavement. During the International Decade of People of African Descent, public forums or hearings should be held with the African American communities to enter into a constructive and open dialogue in which organizations, social movements have access to share experiences and to engage with policymakers and institutions and local, state, and federal government on ways to address the current crisis. We encourage Congress to pass the H.R. 40 Commission to Study Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act, establish the Commission to examine slavery and discrimination in the colonies and the United States from 1619 to the present and recommend appropriate remedies. We encourage the US government to elaborate a national action plan for racial justice to fully implement the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and comprehensively address racism affecting African Americans. The government should increase engagement with human rights organizations and civil society at large, with an aim to implement the Universal Periodic Review recommendations made to and accepted by the USA. We urge the government to ensure that recent policies undertaken to address racial disparities will be further implemented at the federal and state levels. The working group further urges Congress to expedite the passing of all pending criminal justice reform bills including the End Racial Profiling Act, the Second Chance Reauthorization Act, and welcomes the bipartisan support for the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act, which, among other things, proposes to drastically reduce the use of mandatory minimum sentencing. In imposing the sentence, the welfare of the family of the accused should be taken into account with particular attention to the best interest of the child. Appropriate measures should be adopted to prevent excessive bail. Alternatives to detention should also be explored. Community policing strategies should be developed to give community control of the police, which are there to protect and serve them. It is suggested to have a board that would elect police officers to the ones playing this important role in their communities. Before non-payment of a court fine or fee is treated as a civil contempt of court charge, it must first be determined whether the individual has the ability to pay. Imprisonment should not be offered as a way of paying off the debt. If the debt cannot be paid, the fee should not be levied. We also recommend, as a working group, that part of the prison reforms processes and policies include specific policies to address increasing rate of incarceration of African American women. Solitary confinement should be banned, absolutely, for being in violation of international human rights law standards, particularly those found in the United Nations Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, as well as the United Nations Standard minimum rules on treatment of prisoners. The working group recommends to the government to allow independent monitoring of places of detention in the United States, and in this connection, consider inviting the Special Rapporteur on Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, and the working group on arbitrary detention. International human rights standards should be observed in the criminal justice system. We recommend the abolition of the death penalty throughout the United States. The working group calls upon the government to ensure that all states repeal laws that restrict voting rights. In particular, it urges reinstatement of voting rights of persons convicted of felony who have completed their sentences. Targeted measures should be developed with the community to raise awareness and reduce crimes against LGBTQI community, in particular against transgender women. The working group recommends for improving reporting of violations involving the excessive use of force and extrajudicial killings by the police, and ensure that reported cases of excessive use of force are independently investigated, that alleged perpetrators are prosecuted, and if convicted, punished with appropriate sanctions, that investigations are reopened when new evidence becomes available, and that victims of their families are provided with remedy. The working group recommends to the government to step up its efforts to prevent excessive use of force by law enforcement officials by ensuring compliance with the 1990 Basic Principles on the use of force and firearms by law enforcement officials. Security policies in schools should be revisited. Policing in schools should be abolished. Misdemeanor laws should be repealed, such as the misdemeanor law in South Carolina, where school disturbance continues to be a misdemeanor. The use of restraint and seclusion in schools should be prohibited. Early counseling should be given to students with mental health issues. Special attention and protection must be given to students with autism, ADHD, and other similar disabilities. We recommend the government to develop guidelines on how to ensure school discipline policies as well as practices that are in compliance with international human rights standards. Positive behavior, intervention and support, and restorative practices in school discipline should be used for reducing disciplinary incidents and improving learning in schools. Males should be separated from females in detention centers. Younger prisoners should be separated from adults. Alternatives to imprisonment for youth, such as intervention and diversion, should be explored. The working group recommends that health policies and programs should place particular priority on access to quality and affordable health care, targeted goals to reduce maternal mortality of African American women. Consistently, the school curriculum in each state should reflect appropriately the history of slave trade. The Department of Education should study zero tolerance policies and its disparate impact on African American students. A task force should be created to specifically focus on realigning and re-engaging students who have been dismissed from educational institutions as part of a zero tolerance policy. The working group recommends upholding the right to adequate standards of living, including the right to food, right to water, and the right to adequate housing. The government should immediately halt the demolition of public housing without guaranteeing replacement units. All such activities must be undertaken only through prior and informed consent and participation of communities affected. The working group urges the government to strengthen the implementation of Executive Order 12898, including through the allocation of adequate resources. The US government should undertake to review policies to improve protection and ensure environmental justice is provided. The working group encourages the government to undertake impact-oriented activities in the framework of the International Decade for People of African Descent, which kicked off in 2015 and ending in 2024. With these are our recommendations.
All right, I think we'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers. We have some time. Again, I would ask that we allow the news organizations that are present have the opportunity to ask the first questions. As indicated when we started, this was initially intended as a press-only conference, but through the work of the group here, they determined that they wanted to welcome civil society as well. So please let's give the news organization a chance to go first. And also please identify yourself and your organization as you ask the question. Thank you. So we'll go here, so you can.
Dr. Randy Short, I'm with the International Human Rights Association for American Minorities. So I write the Black Identity Report on my questions are very simple. The recommendations are beautiful. However, I know your colonization. In many ways, African American people are more or less colonized. The recommendations are beautiful, but the power structure, the same one you're appealing to, is the same one that has allowed this to happen for hundreds of years. Couldn't we also look towards sovereignty, self-determination, and perhaps a move from a majoritarian democracy to a plural democracy like what you have in France with the Quar, or the Wallons and Flems in Belgium? Otherwise, you're entrusting the child molester to be the caretaker of the child.
Yes, sir. Right.
It is a huge question, but I will try to answer. Um, you know, I'm working on the colonial power and specifically on the aspect of the coloniality of power in knowledge and in knowledge. And one of the things could be done regarding this question is if we want to change the paradigm of which allow the discrimination, the racial discrimination of African American and even African descent everywhere in the world, where it is still a colonized power or former colonizer. The first thing could be to make obliged the history of enslavement and trade slave and the colonization, and not to ignore this history. It's a way also to tackle the elements of coloniality of power in knowledge. And also we have to make aware there is not only the reference of our thinking, intellectual thinking, there is not only one model. Till now, our Occidental civilization are more focused on the modernity, European intellectualism. And we have also to understand from the others, even and specifically from Africa, where African American or African descent are coming from. In Africa, before the 16th century, it was not a desert. It was a continent with a huge level, high level of education, of knowledge, and also with a legal system. And there was a lot of cities very well developed and very crowded. But after the enslavement, the forced enslavement, even more, it's even stronger than enslavement, the forced enslavement and the trade slave, this city became with less people, and they lost their power, the African power, and also their spirituality, and it is what African continent is still paying now, and it is also what the African descent are still paying also now in the different countries where they are living. It is a way to tackle for the legacy of this kind of colonization, and to know exactly, we can share also some knowledge on the legal system. For example, in Africa, there is some very interesting thing with the charter coming from the 14th century in Mali, the Manding Charter, and it was one of the first charters speaking about abolition of slavery, and also equality, and also about
Poverty?
Property. And we never heard about that in our own country, in our Occidental civilization. Just now it's coming out, and we have to learn about that. Our civilization, European or Occidental civilization, could be enriched by such approach. And it is a way, you understand what I mean, it is a way to tackle the supremacy, the white supremacy in the power and in knowledge.
Would that include Egypt as one of the
Of course, it includes all civilizations.
I'm going to go back to the cameras. I'm assuming those are news organizations.
I'm sorry to be too long, but
My name's Jeremy Siegel. I'm an independent filmmaker. My company's called No Filters Media. I'm curious if you could just give a basic explanation on some of the fundamentals of what human rights are, what that means in juxtaposition against the Bill of Rights in the United States? What are the hurdles of implementing international human rights in the United States? And are they compatible with the U.S. Constitution and the U.S. Bill of Rights?
All right.
What is your name?
I am Ricardo. I'm from the Philippines. I teach human rights law. And it's a big question. And I actually wrote an entire semester just to introduce the topic of human rights. So let me just spend a few minutes, or a few seconds perhaps, try and just capture the essence of human rights. My colleagues here, we are precisely engaged in this process of promoting and implementing human rights. Human rights are these fundamental entitlements people enjoy by virtue of their being human, regardless of a variety of factors, including race, nationality, religion, all of these grounds. And human rights are protected on different levels. We are here, we are part of the United Nations to drive home the point that human rights are enjoyed universally, internationally. And one of the issues that we have uncovered here, and it's probably not new to you, is the way by which international human rights standards can be invoked in domestic courts. And we find a variety of issues in relation to this particular area. One is the ratification of international human rights treaties. We have found out that not all of these international human rights treaties have been ratified by the United States.
That's right.
For instance, the optional protocols of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights has not been ratified.
Economic, social,
Yes,
cultural.
several other treaties, the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights. We strongly urge the American government to ratify these. And another area that should be considered is the possibility of invoking these international human rights treaties in domestic courts. Right now, there is lack of enabling laws at the federal level and at the state level that would make possible making these human rights laws as a cause of action in cases to be filed in cases of human rights violations. In this relation, we strongly urge the American government to incorporate, by way of enabling legislation at the regional and at the state levels, these international human rights.
But I don't think you answered the question. Really quickly, just what the basics of human rights are and how they differ from the U.S. Bill of
We have
Rights.
5 minutes with these guys, so we're going to go to this question. There's a lot of questions, so please be brief with the questions. Thanks.
Is it okay for those of us who are from civil society now?
How many journalists? All right. Does anybody have a question in the journalism group? Okay, please.
Yes, my name is Herdosha Bentham, and I am with the International People Democratic Uhuru Movement. And we testified in several of the cities, just not New York. And my question is, all the different things that we talk about here, it's under genocide. And so I just want you to speak on that all these different symptoms is genocide. So how did the working group, what is the next approach with that? Because that's what this is. This is genocide that is happening against my people. Uhuru.
Please.
All right. What we try to capture in our end of mission set of preliminary findings is what the experiences have been in the United States, insofar as the people that we've been able to talk to are concerned. And we see this as an opportunity to start this discussion into the larger issues that are involved here. And really what we want to do is to open up this constructive dialogue with the US government on these issues. And we believe that the set of preliminary findings that we have and that are there, which we try to capture the voice of people of African descent here, we believe it is a good beginning to start off this discussion.
Press here.
Yeah, I'm from Vice News. My name is Samuel. I just had a few comments on the nuts and bolts of this. So, talk a lot about reparations. I'm curious what you might think. I understand you're pushing for them to consider, Congress to consider looking into that. So, what do you think would be a good outcome there? As much detail would be helpful. And also, it's an election year. If you could talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in the U.S. in terms of, with longstanding disenfranchisement, but voting rights, and just how all this compares to other countries you've looked at with populations of people of African descent, former colonized countries.
Another question?
Yeah, let's take two more questions, and we'll have a total of 3. Are any other journalists here that have a question? Journalists, please.
Hi, Jesse with Voice of America. Two-part question. During your visit, what would you say stood out the most to you? I understand that the work group was here 5 years ago. But what would you say, it's been about 10 days, it's the 11th day, I'm guessing. What stood out the most to you? And then also, given the climate, the political climate that we're in, a lot of your recommendations are policy changes. And just given the climate that we're in, I don't want to use the word impossible to get everything, done. So what would you say is the most pressing issue that needs to be addressed immediately?
Okay, last question from civil society.
Okay, thank you. Well, actually, I am a journalist,
Oh, yeah.
but my organization, Marian Douglas Ungaro, I'm the founder of Afro Americas, which is for all the Afro descendants, the slavery descendants of the Americas. Couple of points, one of which no one has really brought up is the fact that the person who is currently U.S. president, there is not a unanimous agreement among Afro descendants from Black Americans from the U.S. that this person actually represents the Black American people. In fact, some of us believe that he was used to distract from the actual situation of Black Americans, and he actually does not come from the Black American people. Okay. Mr. Obama, are you aware that February, 38 days into his administration, we're sitting around here talking about people.
Could we go to the question?
Yes,
please?
I am. It's about genocide and the fact that Mr. Obama, on a Friday night, his administration didn't even hold a real press conference. On February the 27th at night, they announced that the United States would not participate in the United Nations' first follow-up conference to Durban. And that is absolutely unbelievable. Second, as I asked you in Baltimore, in 1951, and this goes to our ancestors, African descendants, Africa is the only continent that you cannot get to directly from the United States for most parts of the US. Everybody else can get to Europe, Asia, but not Africa. But in 1951, 65 years ago, we will be at the United Nations in New York and maybe Paris too, December 17th of this year, because we have asked the United Nations to look at our situation. We charge genocide, the crime of government against the Negro people. And the United Nations, as I understand it, has never formally recognized that they even received the report in 1951. We need your help with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And because of proximity, this gentleman has asked for a 5-second question.
Journalists as well. We need to have the United Nations do something about amnesty for our political prisoners. Prisoners are not mentioned in the
Thank you. There were 4 questions there. We have time to answer them, and then we'll have to close off. There is our flights to catch, so we have to let our panelists move toward Dulles after this round of questions. So I'm sure they would love to stay and talk further, but they do have to get in cars and head out there. Please.
I will answer on the issue of preparation. I think it is an important issue when there is, even if it's a long time ago, if we won't get non-discrimination with equality for everybody, we need to solve the problems where are coming the discrimination. And the discrimination, racial discrimination, is based on the ideology of and the belief there is a hierarchy of race and hierarchy of culture. And we have to deconstruct that, even philosophically, politically, and for change the paradigm. That's why the reparatory justice in one step to get this non-discrimination and equality for everybody. And it was now, I'm sure you are aware about the very important decision taken by CARICOM to sue the British government in order to get reparation after the enslavement and colonization of their country. And it is the first step of this process, and it could get more people together coming from other parts. But it is an important process, and they elaborate a time plan of action. I encourage you to see it visible on the website, but I think the issue of reparation is the main, is one of the main issue if we want to get non-discrimination and equality and tackle definitely the racism who racialize people in reason of the pigmentation of their skin. And it is only people who are attacked or ostracized for that, and they have no means to protest against way to go. It's possible for other kind of prejudice, but for this one, it's absolutely impossible. That's why the reparation justice is something absolutely essential.
Voting rights? What are you seeing this year in voting rights? Is it getting worse in the U.S.? How would you characterize it?
It will answer as it will take the election and the.
Perhaps let me start from what stood out for me. And I want to say that what stood out for me was that it's very easy in the US for an African American to be in prison. And that was really a big concern. Because if we have got a lot of young people and also adult males in prison, you are actually going to affect the entire family. So that's what stood out for me. When it comes to the voting rights, this has an impact on the issue of voting as well. And because we have heard from testimonies of people who are from prison that they cannot actually exercise their right to vote, which becomes a problem. So in that way, I would say a national dialogue is important. The reason why we are here is because the US government invited us to come here. And I think that's a first step to the right direction. It's a first step to engaging with the population. If the US government did not invite us to come here and also to see us and to let us to hear your views, we wouldn't be here. So I think for us, that's a positive thing that has happened. But then moving forward, we cannot dictate how the US government and its people should solve the problems that you have highlighted. There has to be a national dialogue. There has to be an engagement with the state. And that engagement has to be constructive. Thank you.
You know, what stands out for me is this lack of acknowledgement of the slave trade.
Thank you.
Go back to that. Yes, there should be a discussion. It should be a constructive conversation. The terms should be very clear, and the terms should include this acknowledgement that the transatlantic slave trade, and if I may quote, going back to our recommendations, this slave trade was a crime against humanity and among the major sources and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, and that Africans and people of African descent were victims of these acts and continue to be victims of their consequences. Past injustices and crimes against African Americans need to be addressed with the power of justice. Thank you.
And with that, I think, unfortunately, we have to cut off the conversation. I'd like to thank Mr. Menendez-France, Mr. Clemente, Mr. Sanga for joining us. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here today. Again, I introduced myself earlier. I'm Robert Skinner. I'm the director of the UN Information Center here. We hope that all of you will see this center as a resource for information about the United Nations and come to us with questions, and we'll try and find answers for you wherever we can. So thank you all for joining us. We really pushed the limits of our room with people that board our so it was great. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, okay, but they already did it in 1951. No, but I'm saying the United Nations has documented that our ancestors worked hard on and they need to account for what they have done. With that, otherwise we're just being dictated. I know, it's not, well, it's finished, it's finished. And, right there, I don't care. That's what I'm saying. What I didn't know. What I'm saying is that we need for 4 years, like Eric is there. You've been here before they was. Some of us,